Whoa, whoa, whoa. Disclaimer. Disclaimer. The following video presents opinions that are my own. They do not reflect the Department of Defense, the United States Navy, and I am not endorsing this particular politician. I'm not even a citizen of their state. So keep that in mind. Enjoy. These are my opinions.
There is not a square inch in the whole domain of our human existence over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine.
In our last episode, we paraphrased the theologian Francis Schaeffer, stating that if there is no God above the state, then the state becomes God, deciding what's right or wrong for citizens with a moral basis that is foreign and often against the teachings of Scripture. As Christians, we cannot let these things be, especially if we have the opportunity to oppose and guide them. Romans 13:4 tells us that civil magistrates are ministers of God to execute wrath against wickedness, even rulers who aren't Christian. How much more then should we expect out of our Christian politicians? What are they like? What are their priorities? Part of what Politica Christiana is seeking to accomplish is familiarizing our audience with actual Christian magistrates in order to show how they are currently wielding the sword of justice for Christ and seeking to improve upon their duties for the future. These are common, everyday folks who recognize the need to assert the lordship of Jesus, even over the state, so that the state can stand properly before God and on behalf of its people. As the scriptures say, blessed is the nation whose God is the Lord. Psalms 33:12. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the Politica Christiana podcast. I am your host, C.G. Billiot, and this is where Christian politics are understood, analyzed, and applied. This evening, we have the honor and privilege of interviewing Louisiana State Congressman Dennis Bamburg Jr., who serves as a member of the House of Representatives in the 5th District, representing different parts of Bossier, Caddo, and Red River parishes. He assumed office on January 8th, 2024, where formerly he had served on the Bossier Parish School Board as an alumni from my former high school. Shout out the Parkway High School Panthers. He's a hometown hero. He was a football and track star, played Division I athletics, and almost made it to the Olympics. Ladies and gentlemen, please help us welcome Dennis Bamburg Jr. Welcome to the show, DB.
Thanks for having me. Excited about it.
Wonderful. Well, let's just jump right into it. Now, I will warn you, every here and then I might throw in an old story about maybe, me seeing you doing something embarrassing or you give me a hard time during our fantasy football days. But at any rate,
both ways. So just be careful with what you do there.
That's right. That's right. It's all fair in love and war. But first, DB, tell us about your walk with Christ, growing up a Christian, and how that impacts your life today.
Man, mine was pretty easy. I accepted Christ at a young age. I grew up with a mother who made sure. I heard it the other day. Got a drug problem. I got drugged to church every Sunday morning, every Sunday evening, and every Wednesday night. But the interesting thing is, as you get your walk and gets with the Lord, there's ups and downs, there's valleys and mountains. It always seems now like, I don't know, the better things are going in your life, the easier it is to kind of fall away from your daily walk with Christ. I think we do that as a country. You see us just come together and everybody calling on the Lord when the country's in a bad spot or had some kind of crisis situation happen. So that people's hearts are, at some point, that's their fail-safe, is to go back to the Lord, and that's a good thing. But I think the magic is where, if you can do it, while things are while you're on top of the mountain and you're still giving the Lord all the praise for things, and I think what I strive to do every day, and so I don't always succeed at that. But that's the strive. So I married a Christian lady, which makes it very helpful. I think if you surround yourself with other Christians, obviously that makes your walk a lot easier. Not that you're not with trying to affect the world and different people in different places in their Christian walk, but if you can surround yourself, and our kids grew up in a Christian home, and they seek the Lord now. So I wouldn't say we're pleased with our Christian walk at this point, but there's some fruits in just the family that we're very happy and pleased about, that they're following Christ, and we still have to get up and make that decision every day that we're going to call on the Lord to guide our steps throughout the day, and just life and politics and basically everything that we do.
Yeah, amen to that. And we definitely know that fairly well. I like to tell people that Bossier is thoroughly underneath the buckle of the Bible Belt. So we definitely see the kind of genie in a bottle approach to our relationship with the Lord as a people, as individuals, for sure. But at least that's there. Growing up there, I didn't realize that the whole country ate the Bible Belt. So when I went to college up in the Northeast, and there were those crisis moments in college where, there's this crazy test, or it was a military school, right? So we're doing these crazy physical things. That's where, all of a sudden now I'm going to turn to the Lord. But talking with my friends about that, they're like, who's this God? You're talking about this fairy tale you believe in. So, there's pros and cons there, the cultural Christianity, but I love how you talked about your impact being, the impact of your faith being shown in your family, even before your vocation, because especially you young men out there, I will tell you from my own experience, I've never been a congressman, but this one will tell you, I'm sure, that sometimes, actually every time, the more important decision in your life is not who you're going to elect, but who you're going to marry. So make sure you get a good one. I can testify he's got a real nice lady as a bride, and she had a big impact on my life and so many other people growing up. But that being said, with growing up, what in the world prompted you to go into politics? Because like I said before, and I hinted at before, the hometown hero that I knew, the Dennis Bamburg that I knew, was a lot of things to a lot of people. It was a larger than life kind of Chuck Norris figure. But even then, like politics, man, who's gonna be brave enough to do that?
Man, it was kind of a wild start. It just really I got in a position where your class with Victoria, and I think y'all just had a phenomenal class with some great parents that we got to know closely. And we just wanted to be involved and be in the know of what was happening in the schools, because you're seeing all this news across the country with craziness. In fact, I mean, it was just like these little bites taken at the school system, and what was happening across the country. Now, granted, we're under the belt buckle, right? But it, as I know we'll talk about in a little bit, we weren't immune to things happening in our district. And I think the Lord kind of led a few of us at that same time to get on the school board, just to be involved. And, there was a battle to get Christ completely out of the school system. And we had some battles in those very arenas while we were there, and I think we served for such a time as that. It tested us a little bit, but I got started just basically wanting to be a part of what my kids were being a part of, to be in the know, to get a behind the curtain look at what was happening in our school system, and just fell in love with public service and helping people, and then I just kind of made an easy transition to the state level.
Yeah, you're bringing up so many memories just describing that. We are folks going to get to that, those specifics about what my senior class was going through, what was happening in the state, what was happening in our parish, which for those of you not familiar with Louisiana, we don't have counties. We're special. We have parishes. So we'll talk a little about what was going on in our parish, but I think it's worth it because it's such an important idea that young men in particular right now need to begin thinking about, if they haven't yet, this idea of knowing what time it is, looking around and seeing, oh man, if we don't act, this is going to go south real fast. Because you were describing different things that were happening in the school system. And there's maybe a part of you at that time, and maybe other men in other situations, where you're kind of ashamed, like, oh, maybe I should have done my homework before, way long ago, so we should have never arrived here. But circumstances don't always give you that, that comfortable blessing. So when it's on your doorstep, and you need to act. Can you speak about men needing to know what time it is so that they can do the right thing for God and his kingdom?
Well, it's basically being prayed up. I think the Lord will put it on your heart, and the timing that he puts in your life. But you got to be listening. And I think if you get where you're, in tune with the Lord. He's going to tell you how to guide your steps and where to lead what He leads you to say and do in different situations. And I think you really just have to have the antennas up to be saying, God, what can I do today or this week or in this position? And He'll put some stressors on you, right? Because it's not always easy what He wants you to go do. In our school system, the things we were kind of talking about, it does come a little easier because you have support from the community and the churches and the pastors and everybody's on your side. But that's not the case for every leader. Sometimes you just you gotta do what the Lord is prompting you to do, and it's not popular in your area. I just feel blessed to be in a state, in a parish, county, parish, whatever you want to call it, that there was some support for what my true values, Christian values, came when they came up. So I
Yeah.
felt blessed with that.
And again, I know, and I've talked with my brother extensively about this, how much we took it for granted because now we're in different occupations, different walks of life where the assumed Christianity is just not there like it was in our town. And we had no
True.
idea. And it's so funny because we want to be a part of building communities that are ironically like that. I mean, our whole high school careers were oriented around, I got to get out of this place. I got to get out of this place. And then we get out of that place, we're like, oh, it was actually great, like in terms of the Christian culture there. And so we'll talk about that a little bit, but I think you introduced a good segue into talking about just different concepts of governance and Christian involvement and politics, particularly rooted in, you said, your values of faith and your family wanted to do what's right by both of those. But I don't know about you, but growing up, particularly in Bossier, with regard to Christians in politics, we were always kind of postured to always be on the defensive. Don't ever do anything offensively. Just when there's encroachment starting to happen, you better know your rights. Like I remember, it's a small town, funny enough, and not a lot of people know about it. But here we had our congressman at the time, Mike Johnson, coming to the little churches and little schools, telling us what our constitutional rights of religion were, and so we always had a posture of defense. But the idea of being a little bit more assertive, maybe a more offensive of like, no, we need Christian men in these positions. Where did that come from for you? Where did this perspective of Christian political involvement come from?
I can, when I read through some of the topics that we were going to speak on, it led me back to a time when Fred Lowry, who was a pastor at First Bossier, a very influential man and a man of Christ in our city. And he went to a meeting, I believe, with Billy Graham, where Billy Graham was basically saying, look, it's time to not be the passive. I mean, I think the world expects you to be a passive and just, hey, everything's fine, and don't really get too involved, and definitely don't raise your voice with people on different issues. And I think there was a mentality even back then to say we're losing ground today, and what's it going to look like in the future if we don't get these godly men in positions of political power, of leadership in areas. So I can remember when he went to that, I thought it was kind of a little outside the box thinking as far as a Christian, as, oh, we want to not be aggressive, but posture yourself in handling it up front instead of being reactive to things. And so
Right.
I'm not saying that curved what I was doing now, but now we serve under Randy Harper down here at Bel Air Baptist. And he is unashamedly, when he talks about political things from the pulpit all the time. Now, it's truth based in what he believes in and what he backs it up with the Bible. But he says, this is what's going on in Baton Rouge. This is what's going on in Washington, D.C. And here's where our church here's where we need to be. And if you're not here, then it's not biblical. And so
Right.
he is unashamedly, probably one of the most unashamedly men. He has been down to Baton Rouge and testified 3 or 4 times in the past couple of years on different issues, and just kind of, I guess you could call him an activist for God, because he really is wanting to play that role, because most of the congregation, elderly people, they don't get on Facebook, or they're
Right.
not really politically connected, and he is the conduit to these people and their thought processes around what we're doing in Baton Rouge or what they're doing in Washington, D.C., and he is the information highway. So
Right.
I think that's an important role for some of these pastors to play. I know some of them think it's a little, I don't really play in that. That's where you can split a church up and all this kind of things. But I do believe that they do have to take a proactive approach, because Christianity is losing ground across the country. And
Right.
I say has been losing ground. I kind of feel like we're maybe the pendulum may start to swing back a hair.
Hopefully.
Um, but maybe that's just my hopes. I don't know. We'll see.
Right. Well, and so that's such an important. I didn't have that in the questions beforehand, but speaking about that, speaking to that of really what you just said is an encouragement to me that there are still local pastors and local churches who are not afraid to address these things from the scriptural point of view, not their own opinion, but hey, look, folks, like this is not like there's not any local pastors that are trying to lecture their congregations about why these zoning laws are found here in the text of Exodus. But what they are saying is, folks, abortion, pornography, all these other very crazy, destructive laws. Like, no. Like the Bible, not only does it kind of have some things to say about it, it's very clear, and we have to act, or else we're going to live in a almost pagan society. So
Sure.
it's an encouragement to hear those things and to hear that, yeah, no, like we pastors should not be afraid to address these things because if they don't, there's always a vacuum. Then it will be the media, or then it will be somebody else telling our churches how they should think about these issues, and probably not, almost every time, not coming from Scripture. So I appreciate you addressing that. But
Yeah.
in your yeah, in your transition, what was it like going from having this idea, like all these lofty ideas about, all right, this is how godly Christian men should think and act in these positions, and then you get down to Baton Rouge, right? And it's like, okay, well, here's reality. Here's because I mean, it's not an everyday job. Not every single person works in government. So what was that transition? It's a lot like football, right? You have this plan and you get popped in the mouth.
Yeah. I would say I kind of wrote down in my notes that like I probably should have leaned on the. I mean, I got really prayed up right before we went because I knew it was going to, you're getting into a little bigger league of politics, and there's in the school board, there's not really two parties, but when you get to Baton
Right.
Rouge, there's two parties, and sometimes they are diametrically opposed to each other. And it was really just a prayer of how I debate my other people that I serve with. It doesn't need to be in a mean manner. I think a lot of times people think, oh, this guy's really good because he debates and he gets brownie points for really catching them off guard and just destroying them. And that's not what Dennis Bamburg does. So I tried to handle things behind. If I had a problem with somebody, you try to go say, hey, I can't vote for you, and this is why, and I'm not going to try to make a spectacle and get on the news,
Right.
trying to
Right.
embarrass you. And I think how you handle your colleagues is as important as some of the ideals that come to Baton Rouge. Very few of them have to do with. I guess everything has to do with godly issues, but very few of them have to do with they're business related. And yes, you need to be prayed up for those, and you're trying to do the best thing for the citizens and taking care of the meek and the weak and the poor, and you got to keep all these things in your mind when you're making the decisions. And so I've always told people I ran unopposed, but so the good thing is I didn't have to ask a lot of people for money to run a campaign,
Right.
but I never didn't ask for prayer, and
Ooh, yeah.
so
Mm.
it was powerful when you have other people praying for you. And just a quick side note is when I got on the school board, I got a letter from a person who didn't sign it. It just came in the mail and said, "Hey, I'm praying for you," and it was a long dissertation about very specific prayers, and it just meant a lot. And when I became president of the school board, I read the letter at the school board meeting and said, "Hey, this meant a lot. I don't know who it is, but whoever it did, thank you, and we need other people like you in the community." And then when I left the school board and resigned from my position, I got a follow up letter and saying that this person had continued to pray for me during my time with the school board, and that that hoped that I'd felt the presence of God in my life during that time frame, and I did. And it's amazing what the power of prayer will do, even when it comes from other people in your life and the decisions that you make.
Yeah, that's huge. I mean, I can imagine, particularly whether it was in the school board position or even this one, when you do have those colleagues or sometimes, frankly, just enemies, pouring down on you. You
Yep.
could feel like Elijah when he was out in the wilderness and he says, God, I'm the only one serving you. And then the Lord's like, hey, buddy, listen, there's actually 7,000 that have not bowed the knee to Baal. And whether it's 7,000 or that one person encouraging you, I mean, I'm sure that's huge because you go, hey, at least I got this person. Of course, you got your family, you got your church that are in your corner, but it's nice to have even the anonymous that are like, hey, look, we're praying for you, we've got you. And that's powerful.
I don't know if it's like this in every in our House of Representative. We have 105 members, and I probably do a Bible study with, I don't know, 10 or 12 twice a week. While
No
we're
way.
and
Wow.
it's just something to kind of keep you tuned up. because it's so easy when you get down there to just get in the modality of votes and this and that and listen to the lobbyists and tell me about this and committee meetings, and we slow down, twice a week to just get with the Lord and pray with one another, and it makes a difference in your walk. And sometimes
Yeah.
you don't do it, daily or like, Lord, help me today. But when you do it twice a week with some colleagues, and that's who you hang out with down there, that is, our spouses have become very dear friends. And it just makes a difference when you have godly people that you get to serve with. My wife knows their families now, and a year later, we're going and staying in a 7-bedroom house in DC for a Mardi Gras deal. And so
Yeah.
that's it's fun, and we're gonna have a great time. But it's the people that we serve with, and that's the very people that I usually go to Bible study with. And so that's
That's
who we're
huge.
traveling with, and then it makes it easier for my wife to say, okay, I'm a all the bad things you hear about politicians and when they're out of town and all this craziness that goes on. It's just not true, most of the time. And, when your wife buys into those people as well, it just makes it easier for me to go serve with the trust. Nobody's above what things that I guess Satan can put in front of you in certain
Yeah.
situations. And it gives her some peace as well, because she knows the people that I'm hanging out with while I'm in Baton Rouge. So that
Yeah. That's
makes
huge.
it
I
a
mean,
lot easier to serve.
yeah, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to do this show this year in a completely new way that really actually introduces people to Christian magistrates, because you could either have such a caricature from what the media wants you to believe, which, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of, like you were kind of talking about a second ago, there are plenty of politicians who want to make their name in the headlines and in the news clippings of being these raging, people, or maybe they're super corrupt and that's how they make the news. But the truth of the matter is not every politician's like that, particularly not the Christians. So on the one hand, you have to correct that perspective of people, but you also have to correct the perspective of, well, I'm sure the ones that are Christian, that they've all got, masters of divinity and they've read every book of church history about Christians and politics. And, when they step out of line, they ought to know better and all these things. Like, hey, listen, you're armchair quarterback in this. All right. Listen, these are good folks who want to do what's right by their people. They love the Lord. And what you probably don't know is they're doing things just like you described, where they're meeting with other representatives, doubtlessly from other churches of the faith, other denominations, and you guys are getting together behind, that's not going to make the news, unfortunately, even though it
Sure.
should. You know what I mean? Of seeking to do the right thing, not even just for their people, but for themselves and for their families. That's huge, because integrity is kind of like riding on a wagon. Once you fall off, you can get back on, but you'll never forget the time you fell, and it can be really, really hard to get back on the wagon. So that's huge, and I appreciate you sharing that, because that's one of the whole reasons why we wanted to do this show, is to show people, hey, this is what actual Christian politicians look like. This is what they're doing, and it may not be either as crazy as you think or as academic and intellectual as you think. It's just real people doing real things.
It's definitely not as academically intellectual as they think.
Right. Exactly.
Not in my case, anyway.
Man, I'm sure one of those people in the Bible study was thinking, "Well, actually, I know, if they watch this."
Yeah.
But we are gonna address some theological concerns too. So that was actually the next question. So it was a good setup of this kind of delves into that pastoral discussion too, of perhaps one of the reasons why pastors are often at the local levels, or even with dealing with national politics, they're afraid to address some of these issues, is because for many Christians for the last several decades, there's been this idea of, well, this world ain't my home, I'm just passing through. So no matter what happens, like, yeah, it's unfortunate, but we can't really do anything to stop it, or we shouldn't. Politics is icky, it's worldly. How have you reconciled some of those ideas, which, there might be some truth there? How do you reconcile those with the reality of, like, okay, but we have to do what's best by our children and our communities and the name of God and the worship of God? How have you reconciled those things?
Man, I think we're asked to do the Great Commission while we're here and reach as many people for Christ while we're here on this short time that we're here on earth. And, so when I look at it, I'm trying to set as good up that I can this state as my position now, for my children to come back and to
Mm,
thrive, and they may not come back, but give them um, a moral compass state that does things the right way. And luckily, I serve in a state that mostly gets that right, and I
Yep.
think there's some states that mostly get that wrong, and we see that in the
Yep.
national politics. But politics sometimes is icky. It just is, and how you square that. I mean, I think you got to put your best foot forward for the Lord. That's what He asks us to do. And, I mean, I just don't think there's a spot where you say, "Well, I'm here for a short time, and I'm not worried about this world anyway." I mean, if you're kind of in it for the wrong, you definitely wouldn't want to be in politics if that's your thought process, or probably in the pastoral care either,
Yeah.
because you need to make the world as good as you can while you're here, and do your best, put your best foot forward.
I like that. That's good. Yeah. And especially what you talked about of really leaving an inheritance for your children, whether they take it or not. That was something that I didn't realize is actually a really big part of Southern culture. It's all around us, people being mindful of what world they're going to leave their kids. I didn't really see that until I lived in other places where there's really not a regard for, it's almost like what the book of Ecclesiastes talks about, where it says, we're just going to eat, drink, and be merry, and tomorrow we die. You see that in other policies in other states and other places. And so I'm very grateful for what we grew up with in Louisiana, the work of people like yourself, what you're doing, so that even if your children don't come back to the state, even if I never go back to Louisiana, whoever is going to be there, they will be given a godly society, and they might not even know it, but just by the treatment that they receive from the state, it will be God honoring. So that being said, again, Christians in politics gets a bad rap. Even the phrase Christian nationalism is oftentimes used as a slur almost. It's really a coded way to just say white Christian nationalism or white supremacy or Christian fascism, or it's really a bad thing. But when we think, or at least it's painted as it, but when we think about Christian nationalism, we have a nation, we have a state, and we have Christians living there. Just purely at that, if it was just majority Christian, would it be wrongful, sinful to call it a Christian state or a Christian nation? And shouldn't we want more godly laws than more ungodly laws? How do you wrestle with that phrase that is oftentimes used to injure Christians, Christian nationalism? Good, bad, ugly, what do we do with it?
Well, I mean, it's a tagline that has become divisive in some form or fashion. But I mean, nationally, when you look at our forefathers, that's what happened when they came here. I mean, it was a
Right.
Christian country. You can tell by our money and by our buildings and by everything that they put into place. And it's unbelievable with the Constitution, the way they wrote it, how they knew we were going to try to screw this thing up many years later, how they protected it
That's right.
against most of it. And we're getting
Yeah.
pretty smart and trying to screw it up anyway. Yeah, if we could replace it to God-like, maybe, I don't know, Christian-like, maybe that they got a bad connotation around Christian
Right.
nationalism and all that kind of stuff, but that's how we started. And look, I
Yep.
serve with Christian, Caucasian, Black Christians, Hispanic Christians. If you're a Christian, I don't think it's offensive.
Right.
But so much of
Right.
our world now is saying, well, we're going to turn this into a negative. I don't think it's fair, because I think we would be a better country if it was a Christian national country. I mean,
Right.
that's the truth and ideals of our Lord is what runs that, not the mindset of what one person thinks Christian national is versus what another person thinks it is. And if we need to change the word, that's fine. But if what I think of Christian nationalism is more people being Christ centered across this country, I'm all for that. You
Right,
know,
right. And it's also probably an issue. I'm willing to bet, correct me if I'm wrong, but even a phrase like that or ideas like that where people are trying to paint Christians in a certain light, or and again present these boogeymen, it's probably not something that you and your colleagues are regularly discussing. You're actually trying to accomplish real things. Like you'll worry about the headlines later, right?
yeah. I mean, it's really not something we deal with at the state level in Louisiana. It's I hear it as a tagline in national politics, and I just don't take it as a negative. I don't. You can put a negative spin on just about any word that you use, and become taboo to use in politics, and we've done that with a lot of words. Um,
Right.
that
But it doesn't keep y'all up at night.
No, not at all, not at all.
Yep.
No,
Good stuff.
zero
Good
zero
stuff.
thought around it.
Which should probably be an encouragement to other folks that it should, if it's keeping you up at night, just go touch grass, go do something else. It
That's
should
right.
not be keeping you up at night. But how would you describe, talking about regular folks, even in the parishes that you represent, how would you describe the typical, just imagine them, have them in your mind for a second, the common evangelical, the common believer, how would you describe I'll put myself in that category. I was one of them. How would you describe our political acumen? Like, do we have any idea what's going on? Do we care, or do we only care until it's too late? Like, how would you describe the political experience of the common evangelical?
I think it's very easy to get in your own little holy huddle and think that things are okay and not really try to be proactive. It's reaction to everything.
Yep.
And then the other thing that I think that kind of gets in the way of that is, or they'll get hyper focused on one ideal and then not really be involved in the rest of the ideals that are going on in politics. But you're hyper focused on one event, and which may work, but I mean, get involved in all facets of it. But for the most part, I think it's really that they're reactive. When a law is passed, your
That
phone
they don't like.
blows off the hook, right?
Right.
Or even when it's passed in a good way, Ten Commandments. It was all
Right.
like, oh, when did that happen? How did that come about? And really just uneducated as the process as that was going through the process, just didn't know, didn't care. We're so disconnected, especially we're in the northern part of the state, as you know. Baton Rouge is in the southern part of the state. And so we're really disconnected from Baton Rouge. So our people really just don't. If you lived in Baton Rouge, their families are in there all the time and they're connected to the Capitol and all this kind of stuff. But up here, it's out of sight and out of mind. And,
Right.
they'll get a news blip on it after it happened. And all of a sudden your phone will blow up and say, what were you thinking? Or, to God be the glory. That was awesome. And, all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah.
maybe, and that comes back to pastors engaging. And I think,
Yeah.
maybe at Bel Air, they're a little more informed because Randy came down there and spoke on the Ten Commandments a few times. Was a big piece of that legislation going through the thing, and he talked about it from the pulpit. But I don't think that happened from across the state as a pastoral community to say,
Right.
hey, look, here's what's going on, and here's how we can pray for these people, or here's how we can go down there and sit and provide testimony at the.
Yeah. I mean, so in my line of work, people are literally from all over the world. And one of the things I love telling people I'm from Louisiana because everybody looks at you like you have a third eye. But I love it because when we have some kind of wacky thing in our own politics, our own state politics that makes national news, it is always something a little atypical. And so
Really?
they'll always look at me and be like, you know what's going on? I was like, not till right now, but that sounds about right. That sounds about right. I love it. Especially I've been holding myself back this whole episode so far from getting into the Louisiana politics because it's just so fun, in my opinion. I mean, it's probably not always fun for you in Baton Rouge, but we'll get to that for sure. But I think you're right. I think there is a lot of holy huddling that happens until, like you're saying, until it's the genie in a bottle effect. But again, that's one of the reasons why we're trying to normalize shows like this, where people realize, hey, look, you're chasing the wag of the tail of the dog for the national politics, not realizing that your own neighborhood, your own state has got its own problems, and we should be read up on them. We're not finding out about it after something already passes that you don't like or you do like, because that's an organic way of living. It's one of those things where, the common evangelical could probably name 10 federal politicians, but couldn't name their representative, or they couldn't name their sheriff. And I realized that last year because I've lived in Jacksonville, Florida now for over a year, and I'm like, I couldn't tell you who the sheriff is. I had just found out who the mayor was. Like, what's going on? So I think we all kind of need that encouragement. And if pastors are doing it, if this is a regular part of a well-orbed Christian life, then we can have that appropriate and healthy balance, I think, for sure.
Completely agree.
All right, DB. Well, right here, we'll take a break for our sponsors before we get into that fun can of worms that is Louisiana politics.
Sounds good.
All right, guys, I got some bad news. I accidentally deleted the very cheesy ads we did for the first episode, but that's probably for everyone's best interest anyway. So here we go with some off-the-dome, impromptu, no-script ads from our sponsors. Number one, Politica Christiana is brought to you by the Battle and the Bride blog. Really, really great stuff going on there, folks. If you need content for your family, covering theology and politics, cultural engagement, homemaking, etc. We even dropped our first blog post there this past week, covering all kinds of wonderful stuff about America's Christian past. So go ahead and check out thebattleandthebride.com. Second, Squirrely Joe's Coffee. Last time we gave a pitch about them being like the Chick-fil-A of Christian coffee companies. You need to make it happen, folks. They share coffee, serve humbly, and live faithfully. That's their tagline. They bring you great products, deliver right to your door, and let's support them. This little family-owned business could be the next Christian enterprise that takes over the country. I want them on my street corner, and so should you. And lastly, Mount Athos Performance. Ascend to excellence with their fantastic premium products. Guys, especially if you follow our Instagram page or our Twitter, I kind of shout them out regularly because I use their stuff every day. I'm very, very, very biased. I get very excited about their products because they're already making a difference in my performance life for sure. I even take their Sigma Mind supplements before I do content because it really does help me focus. It's organically sourced. If you want to know, wait, how does using goat milk help these products? They've got a fantastic episode with Cross Politic. Their CEO, Joe Stout, a good godly man, lays it all out there. The link for that will be in the description. With all those things being said, if you like our content, please like, subscribe, follow, all those things, whether it's our Instagram, Twitter, our YouTube. You could also hop over to our merch store through thebattleandthebride.com and buy yourself a t-shirt, represent the show. And very soon we will be dropping our Patreon, the Deo Vindice podcast, with all kinds of neat perks there too, so stay tuned for that. But please, if you like the show, support us. Thank you so much for your time. Let's get back to the show. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Now we will be discussing Louisiana and the nation, a little state making big headlines. So as DB had mentioned previously in the episode, Louisiana made some ripples in the water with a 10 Commandments law earlier this past year. Congressman, could you describe that law? And can you describe the foundations of the argument for it?
It was funny because we had to watch national politics and national CNN radio, TV shows that had two of my colleagues that I served with, and one of them was on site. They were debating it on CNN. It was kind of crazy to watch, but it started out, it's the baseline of the 10 Commandments is the baseline of our judicial system across this country. And Dodie Horton, which is a representative in Halton that I share a lot of, we share a line between our districts. So we have one side of the street I will have, and the other side of the street she will have. So I served with her. She's a third termer, and she just wanted to say, hey, our judiciary is based on it. It's a good thing for these kids to know because most of them are not being taught this at home in right. This time and day, or their lack of a father in the home, or their parents, both parents are working, and so somebody else is trying to raise these children. They're going home to a key latch or all these kind of things. But she just thought it was like, this is a wholesome thing that kids can learn and read and know, and what our judicial system is built upon. And it wasn't really about this is in the Bible and we're trying to push the Bible down. We're trying to win a battle that we're going to put the Bible back in the schools.
Right.
As a Christian, obviously God's word. We want any piece of God's word on the wall in a school that we can. But as a elected official with laws and different things like that, that was based on this is a historical document that right. was meant for our judicial system, and that it's what our country is based on. And so right. It's in the fabric of our country, and now it should just in the fabric of our classrooms in Louisiana.
Right. Yeah, it was powerful. When I had first heard about it, I was like, "Oh, I gotta dive into this." And I saw the debate you were talking about with Congressman, I believe it was
Ventrella and Green. Yeah,
right. They were duking it out, and I remember thinking to myself, I thought back to when I was in high school, and we'll get into different things that happened with our class. But I know, and tell me if I'm wrong, I think one of the things about evangelicals in states like Louisiana is there's something about something in them that tells them, hey, this is a good law. We should want this. But they're not sure why. Maybe it's because they're not familiar with the history of our country, of our state, or the theology, the theological side of it. But there's something in them that tells them, yeah, we should do this. And so then when we're asked, well, what about separation of church and state? Or what about, unbelievers that are going to be in classrooms? It's so funny. Sometimes the responses are like, well, that's tough because this is the right thing to do. And we're going to do it. So yeah. How do we equip our people? I know we talked about pastors being a little bit more intentional, but when we're talking about something like American history or state history and the theological premises for why it is permissible that we could do something like that, we gotta catch up, don't we, on getting our people educated on these things, huh?
No,
No,
absolutely. And I
absolutely.
think most of the people, the evangelicals, were like, "Oh yeah, I mean that's biblical scripture that's now in the schoolhouse." And
Right.
it really, that's not what the premise of it was. The premise was, hey, these are good, valuable items to live by in our country, the fabric of our country, and that's the premise that this was put in on. I think Lauren Ventrella is a spicy young lady in our
That's right.
body, and I think it was a setup deal. It was two against one, and
Right.
he got beat up with some statements, and finally, I think she was just like, "Hey, I don't. It's a good law, and I don't care what you're saying," and
Right.
and so
Yep.
Kyle Green was on the other side of that. He's a good friend of mine as well, and he's a lawyer and makes some good arguments, and sometimes he's tough to debate. And
Right.
but it was 2-on-1 that day, and I thought Lauren at some point I think she just had enough and said, "Hey, this is a good law, and we passed
Right.
it. You can do what you want to with it."
Right. Yeah. And so, just for the folks back home, and a shameless plug for our own content here at Politica Christiana, we just released on our blog this past week it's a brief article outlining the Christian history of America, but it is far more thorough than many of us, even myself, are familiar with in terms of the primary source evidences of things like Ten Commandment laws, or a lot of people don't realize, even at the federal level, we were still prosecuting people for blasphemy laws in the mid 1800s, which you would think there's no way we were doing that, but no, we really were a Christian nation. So when you talk about something like a Ten Commandments law, you could make the argument it's American, it's part of our tradition, and then on another level, because at the end of the day, we're not just down here legislating, to our own whims and desires. Things they either glorify God or they don't. And so magistrates need to challenge those things which are ungodly. And so obviously we want to attack laws that are ungodly, things like abortion or things
Right.
like pornography, whatever. But we also want to promote good godly laws, because those things, again, they trump wickedness and they push out darkness, and for all the good wholesome reasons that Congressman Horton she was putting out, those are things we have to dive into as well. So that's another reason why this show exists, is to give people a positive Christian and American view of these sorts of things. So yeah, it was so neat to see all that make the national headlines, and to really bring that into conversation. Because on the one hand, and it's why state politics matter. Because is that happening across the nation? No. However, you can look at it and see it in Louisiana. Right now in Oklahoma, they're putting all the Bibles back in schools. Like, there's the state politics matter, folks. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and you do, and what you will find is you copy legislation from other states.
Yep.
So when somebody puts a good piece of legislation, and you may be Christian person who thinks that the Ten Commandments are good laws and the basis of our judicial system, and you're like, hey, I'm going to do this in my state. You go copy the law that Dodie Horton put and said, hey,
Right.
put Nevada on it. Well, I'm probably not going to use Nevada, but put Oklahoma on it, and move forward. And
Right.
that's how, I mean, you're copying other laws of other states. So I think
Right.
that will be one that's copied. It's going to go through the court system thoroughly before anybody ever probably approaches that moment. But
Right.
it was a big win, and I think Dodie's just one of those special people who always has a smile on her face and is emotional with her, the way that she practices being a state representative, and it really, she was the perfect person to carry that legislation because she was just passionate about it, and handled herself very good in that
Right.
ring.
But you got to be tough, especially if you're from Houghton. Them people are fighters, all right? They're not going to
Bossier
just.
Parish, baby.
Yeah, well, but especially Houghton, man. They're tough people. They're going to stick it through. So,
That's
uh,
right.
and that's the thing. So before we move on to the next piece of Louisiana politics, I think it's worth noting too that when it comes to something like a Ten Commandments law in your state, folks, yes, understand that things like that, you're going to face tons of opposition from unbelievers, but you'll face opposition from believers too, because again, perhaps they don't have that historical background, or they don't have the theological background. But it's actually quite simple to just ask somebody, hey, look, Are you telling me the Ten Commandments are bad laws, things we shouldn't read? Well, no, they're good, but we shouldn't force it down anybody's throats. Or it's like, all right, well, but if that isn't, then another morality will be. They're going to be taught a morality. So what this can come down to is it's a lot like when you're a little kid and you've got a cold or something, you got to take the cough syrup. You hate the taste, but you know it's good for you. Is we either think that way about the law of God or we don't, folks. And if we're going to bear the name of Christ, maybe we should reconsider God's law. But I don't know if you want to comment on that before we move on.
I think I don't know if I could say it any better than you just said it, my friend. So that's good stuff.
Very well, very well. I mean, that cough syrup's tough though. I always like the grape flavored, but it still wasn't great. But at any rate, the in 2022, this was another one that made national headlines. The Abolition of Abortion Act was considered, and it was almost passed at the state level. Now, this was before you got in, so I'm gonna give you a little bit of grace in that. But it would have brought equal protection to unborn children. Why do you think it failed, and do you think something like that ever has another chance to pass?
Man, I think it has a chance. It's just it's a really tough issue. Olivia, my daughter, you know her. She is in public policy at Ole Miss. They went through this deal as a public policy issue, and she called and she says, "Hey, Dad, they're arguing this, and you want to watch it with me?" And so we watched it, and they're saying the 13-year-old that was raped by her father is now having to have a unwanted pregnancy and carry it to full term. And that's painful to listen to. It's hurtful, and you're like, I'm trying to put myself with a 13-year-old daughter that would be put in a situation, and at that point in their life, for that anything like that to happen to them. But I mean, I think if you focus on the child, right, the
Right,
embryo, the
right,
heartbeat, and by the time you figure out you're pregnant, you got 7 months to go, right? And it's going to be painful for that person that was raped or incestual relationship or whatever it may be in that series. But in 7 months, you have a child, and you can make a lot of decisions at that point. You can keep the child because your heart may have changed. The Lord may have changed your heart. There may be a family that God is destined to have your child and care for that child for the rest of their life. I mean, that child can grow up and be a teacher. It can be a
right,
president. It can cure cancer. It can reach people for Christ. Um, but I think the other thing I don't think that people really say is, well, what happens if you abort the baby? How long does that pain last then? You still
right,
have the same pain in your heart, right?
right,
Except now, 10 years from now, where you could say, man, look at my child is, you know, I don't know, getting into high school, and I get to watch them from afar. I get to be part of their life. Or you could be saying, I aborted a child. I killed a baby, that was mine, and I was responsible for that decision and the turmoil that goes along with that. But it sounds black and white to the evangelicals, but man, when you really get down and dig in, there's some hurtful. It is hurtful for the people that are involved in that, and I think if you can focus on the child of this in this conversation versus focusing on the heartache that a person may have during that time frame, which you can't take. But I'm one that says you can't take that away regardless.
right.
That
Yeah.
heartache's going to be there.
Right. And I think so this is worth noting for the folks at home too. So about a decade ago, the pro-abortion side of this conversation, they realized they had a tagline that the fetus beat us. That when pro-lifers were focusing on, you got to understand, you're killing a child. Like that's a
Yeah,
whole human being. That is murder. That has consequences, legal consequences. They said we can't focus on that. So they started shifting the narrative to examples like what you were saying, which are true and painful and tragic situations of a very, very young girl being abused wrongfully. It's sinful. But they realized if we focus the narrative on the women, not the children, then we can do a lot of damage with this. And it really
yeah,
started muddling the conversation because in an event in which someone dies, we're shifting the conversation to be not about that person. It's about the other person involved, the parent. And so it's interesting because this is actually an arena where the law of God does remedy the situation. So so I believe, and I'd love for your comment on this too. I do believe there has been an agenda to push narratives like that, rape, incest, abuse, because statistically speaking, those are still a minority of all abortions. Most abortions statistically are
Absolutely. It's
still
probably 1 in a million. You know,
right,
it's they use the worst case scenario to prove a point, where
right,
most of them are just an unplanned pregnancy
right,
is all they are. You know, and
right,
like, hey, the easiest thing for me to do at this point is have an abortion. So
right,
because I'm not quite ready to have a baby, and that's not a. I mean, you know, and so that's their
right.
focus is on one heartache, heartstring pull situation that is real and very painful, but it's not. You're right. It is in such it's the
Right.
lesser part of 1% of the issue.
Right.
So
So, but the thing is where people on the pro-abortion side, where you have to give them credit, is there's something in them that wants justice. Don't get me wrong. We want justice too in this situation. In those, even if we assume those the statistical minority of those instances, we should still want justice, right? And so, where the law of God comes in and says, "Hey, if it's a case of rape or incest, kill that guy. Don't kill the baby." Right? Like, if somebody has to die,
yeah,
kill that guy. But don't, if someone's going to die, it's got to be them. And this is actually where the logic of the equal protection law, the Abolition of Abortion Act of 2022, was trying to posit, is that the consequences, there's going to be consequences of this, and needs to be on the abortionist. It needs to be on the rapist or whoever the abuser is. And we need, because this is a human being that's entitled to with dignity and worth in the womb, we should treat it similarly to how we would treat a regular murder.
sure.
And it failed. So do you think we, part of that narrative of, again, focusing on mothers in this instance, is distracting from the reality of murder? Do you think that's
There's no doubt. I mean,
right?
there's no doubt. I mean,
Yeah,
that is the one that you know. And I'm gonna be very honest here. It makes you pause for a second when you hear these stories. You're like, God,
yeah,
yeah, let me, because that's one thing I try to do as a legislator is I try to not just have a knee jerk reaction to, oh no, you're wrong, abortion's wrong, and that's where I'm
right,
at, and all this kind of stuff. Instead, just sit here and say, I'm going to listen to what you have to say,
right,
and you do, and it's just the story they tell is just painful and hurtful, and you put yourself
right,
in with a 13-year-old as a father with the pain that you could have as a family,
right,
and but in the end run, you're right. If we focus on the fetus, it's very clear what God's word says about that, um,
yeah,
and it should be clear, and not to take away the pain. I mean, I think that's what some evangelicals just try to say, hey, strike it, it's terrible, you're a killer, you're a murderer, and maybe that's not the montage, but let's just keep our. It is the death of a fetus, and it's the death of a human, and God knit
yeah.
that human together in the womb like He knit us together.
Right. And God thought babies were so important, He became one.
Yeah,
So that should be our first
that's
forethought when we
good. I
think of.
like that.
Right, right, right. So that should be our first forethought when we think about something like
Sure.
abortion. So we'll
Yep.
continue to pray for that, because Louisiana had a chance to make history with that law. I think the seeds are still there, and Christians, we should just pray we're logically consistent, while still bearing the responsibility to take care of those women who are really abused, and providing for those unexpected mothers. And that
Sure.
is something, though, that I don't care what anybody says. The state of Louisiana is doing a great job of that. There's so many crisis pregnancy centers. There are so many churches and ministries, millions a year, taking care of women. So, because that's something you hear all the time, particularly when Roe v. Wade fell, is, well, all you conservatives, you never take care of women. I was like, look, where I'm from, like it's a regular part of local church ministry to be involved with women's clinics.
Yeah, because I mean the most influential thing you can do to that mom is show her baby on a sonogram.
Right,
And then the game if you can ever make that happen, the game changes, because
right,
now they see that as a child and with life, and
yeah.
uh, so there's all kind of focus on the fetus. I like it. That's good
Yeah.
stuff.
Well, and that's what you just said, surreal. And it was surreal for my wife and I when we were having our firstborn. We went in at 10 weeks, still very, very early.
Hmm.
And she saw our son wave. And she just broke down in tears, because she was like, how could anyone ever tell me that child's not alive? He's waving at us,
Yeah,
so it's
yeah,
unreal. But Yeah, so we'll continue to pray for policies like that and for
Sure.
God to provide wisdom to leaders. Because, like you said, I mean, this is a tough situation. A lot of people have no idea what it's like to be in the arena. You're in the seat. You're casting your vote. We pray for godly wisdom to our leaders and our magistrates that they, no matter what pressures they're facing, they just do the right thing. So I appreciate your comments on that because I know
Yep.
it's pretty sticky.
Yep.
This one really is just a memory, and I thought it was really neat to show it forth because it was one of those things where, again, I took for granted at the time, but when I explain it to people from other states, they're like, "There's no way those things were happening. There's no way that happened." You were probably like, "No, like it's pretty neat. Louisiana, Bossier Parish is a neat place." So, in 2018. Students across Bossier Parish and its neighbors, so Caddo and Webster, they rallied to advocate for prayer in schools. Eventually, a good friend of yours and another person I grew up seeing all the time, Ryan Gaddy, he put forth legislation that passed allowing teachers to pray with students during the workday. This is an example of Gen Z playing a role in crafting state politics. So, can you comment on that situation? What was it like from your point of view? Because I like to get in it myself. And is there hope for Gen Z uh, in Christian as Christians in politics? It's a loaded question. There's a lot going on there, but it's a fun topic.
I'll try to take a little bit at little bites at a time, but I was on the board when we went through the prayer lawsuits, and so what happened was we got sued by ACLU. You know, usually you get a letter from the ACLU, and you may have another organization that ties on to it. And when Bossier got the letter, it was every conglomerate of letters that were tied into the ACLU was on one letter saying, "We're coming after you, Bossier." And so,
Yep.
as an elected official, right, we're sitting there, we're talking to our attorney, and he goes, "Okay, you mentioned we were in the under the belt buckle of the Bible Belt. We had scripture on walls in our church. We had
Yeah.
Bibles open on desk and teachers' deals. They had scripture
Yeah.
on their screensavers, on their mouse pads. Uh,
Right.
it was there were some things that legally were not correct. Like the law has been tried, and we're not doing it right." Um, but I can remember, we went over there and we're negotiating the lawsuit, and we went to Monroe, and we all went over there in two or three cars, and we're sitting there, and they had their attorneys come in from New York and
That's
uh,
wild.
Oregon and Chicago, and we're sitting there, and we're just good old Bossier Parish school board members, and we're sitting
Right.
there with our attorney just from Monroe, right? And so we go over
Yeah.
there. We're sitting there, and they're in one room and we're in the other, and the magistrate's going back and forth between the two, saying, "All right, let's try to get this thing settled where there's not a lawsuit."
Right.
Um, and they came in. They said, "Hey, we are not going to let the teachers bow their heads when a student's praying." So it had to be student-led
Wow.
prayer, right? And I can remember the feeling, and we kind of just all came to the same deal at one time, like, that's too far.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, of course.
is that a sticking point in our deliberations today, or can we take that off the board right now? And they said, "No, that's where we're going to be at." We were there
Wow.
for 20 minutes. We got up as a group and left and said, "Sue us," because we were so concerned. Our attorney has basically said, "Hey, this can cost you a couple $1 million that Bossier Parish really
Wow.
doesn't have, and you can stand on principle and lose money, or you can." And so it was a little small victory in our own minds to say, "Okay, you pushed us. We came over here ready to maybe negotiate a few things that even when we had Mike Johnson come in and kind of talk to us about legally where do we stand on it, and we were going to have to give on a few things." And there was some kind of just redemptive spirit about they took the step that was a little too far, and it was a great feeling to just get up and say, basically, come get us. At this point,
Right.
we're going to battle. And
Right.
so, um, and ultimately, you see where we turned up.
Yeah.
We do have some things in Bossier Parish that we have to abide by, but now they've had the Supreme Court here, with the coach praying with his
Yeah.
kids, that passed the Supreme Court, and it's a step away from the wall. It's not a
Right.
judge. it's not a giant leap because a coach has been praying in Bossier Parish with their students forever.
Yeah, I was going to
Right?
mention that. Yeah. Yep.
And so now they're student led. A lot of them are, but you know what it's doing? It's creating Christian leaders, which leads me
Yeah.
to Gen Z. And
Yeah.
so, I mean, I think
Good,
our
good one.
job
That was
is,
good.
I mean, that's y'all. That's my
Yeah.
kids. We have two people in the legislature. I had to look up when did Gen Z start, and it's 1997. I think we have two people in the legislature that were born in 1995. So we're on
Good
the
close.
cusp of
Yeah.
state leadership being Gen Z. We're turning it over to Gen Z,
Yeah.
and Lauren Ventrella is one of those individuals. So, I think I think maybe the laws that were passed here are now making students step up, like yourself, like um, at Parkway, just to kind of give you some information. And I want to brag on our area and the school that you went to and that I went to and my children went to. They came out the beginning of this year and had a new FCA director and said, "Hey, can we get some local businesses to come together? We think we're going to have 50 people for FCA breakfast, and we're going to do this." And they had 192.
Wow.
And
Yeah,
so
that's
then they
really
said, "All right," somebody came in and just gave them $5,000 and said, "All right, this should take you through the year. We've done the math." Well, the next week they had 220. And so
wow.
now the
Wow.
money's not going to take them as far as they thought. And so
Yeah.
I don't know what the reasoning behind what changed at Parkway High School. You plan for 50. God says, "Hey, I'm gonna show you how good I am." Right.
Right. Yeah.
And now you've got students that are leading this that now are not stepping up in front of 50, they're stepping up in front of 200 kids.
Yeah.
You don't think that's the leader that we want in Bossier Parish for tomorrow? That's craziness. I mean, that's
Yeah,
who's going to
exactly.
step up and come back and start at the school board level or the city council level or the parish police jury. But that's where the next steps go. I mean, that's where I started, and I went to the state. Mike Johnson started at the state and went to, now ultimately Speaker of the House.
Yeah, it's huge.
So
Huge. Yeah, man, I have so much I want to get to, so I apologize to our audience, but I've never heard that perspective of the story. That's insane. And what a crazy story. I mean, just looking at them across the table of like, oh, I guess we're gonna have to do this. And that's surreal. Because there was a sense, I remember there being a sense with all my friends of, we're little old Bossier. Why is this national lawsuit, law firm coming to us? And especially our friends over in Webster, they're even more rural, smaller schools, and they had a double whammy because they had the prayer dealio, and then it's crazy when I tell some of my peers from all over the country, like, yeah, when my senior year, like ACLU was suing the county over teaching creationism. They're like,
yeah,
you guys were teaching creationism? I'm like, yes, sir, we were. Yeah. And then I look back, I'm like, man, we were awesome. Like, we didn't even know. We didn't even know that. We
yeah,
didn't know how cool that was. But at any rate, so our perspective, which that's really neat, and praise be to God for yourself and the men who were part of that, because it was worth it, and it really was not just a blessing to our community in a legal sense, but it really was in a spiritual. Because for our generation, it started with Catherine Gaddy, and the Gaddies organizing like, hey, we're just going to get students together and sign these petitions. And you would have thought that Billy Graham himself had pulled up to, have a tent revival, because we had hundreds. All of a sudden, even our friends who we weren't even sure they were Christians, they were coming out in droves to not only sign these petitions, but to worship together. We had several worship nights. We had T-shirts made. It was all over social media. It was a legitimate movement. I think it might have been the only time in my life where I knew, oh, this is a movement and we're a part of it. It was huge.
100%.
And yeah, and it was surreal, just like you were saying, because like I said, I had friends that I wasn't even sure they were Christian. They were on the football team, and they're like, if this goes through, Coach May isn't going to be able to pray with me or for me. And I was like, that's wild. That's that. But praise be to God. And to me, it taught me very early on that if Christians just care, if we care about what's going on around us, we can actually accomplish a lot without being ugly, without being destructive, but by constructive and literally worshiping the Lord. I mean, we were just getting together and worshiping, right? And it was unreal in many respects. So it's neat. And I think you're right. I think Gen Z, in light of all of the national controversies, even at a very local, kind of isolated level like Bossier Parish can be, we're realizing we want to connect to something bigger than ourselves, something older than the last 5 minutes of argumentation. And in that, may we pray that this generation, it was really the tagline of the Protect Prayer movement was that passage out of Esther you referred to earlier of, we pray that we really are born for a time like this, to lead our people, yeah, sure, to better communities, yeah, sure, to better, safer businesses, but above all things, to a more Christ honoring society with a Christ honoring people. And what Christian is going to be opposed to that? So that's hopefully the posture that Gen Z is going to take.
Yep. I hope so.
Yeah, I hope so. there's some of us you really got to worry about, but as we Congressman Bamburg, I want to thank you for your time as we land this plane. How would you recommend that Christians improve our political acumen that we described before, and how do we really focus that at the local level? Because again, local politics always takes the back burner to whatever's on Netflix. So, what would you say to those two things?
Man, I mean, obviously, it goes back to I believe that the churches should get involved in these elections. Um, stay on biblically based items. But I mean, we need Christian leaders to be elected, and they need to come from the local church. Not that somebody else can't lead and make great business decisions and different things like that, but if you follow the path between I'm gonna serve on Bossier Parish School Board, and then if I really like what I'm doing for 8 years, my next step is going to state politics. Now, if you hold me accountable as a leader on Bossier Parish School Board as a church or a Christian group or, all those kind of things, that just follows me through to my walk and how I operate as a state legislator.
Right.
And then, I mean, you can pass that through. I mean, the crazy thing here in Bossier Parish, you can pass that from school board to state legislature, and then with Mike Johnson from state legislature to not only congressional seat, but to Speaker of the House, the third in charge,
Right.
the country
Right.
of the United States. And so, and you see how his walk with Christ is unwavering through this whole process. What a godly spirit that man has to, and it affects his colleagues. I mean, the beautiful thing is there's 417 people that voted for him to be their leader, and he is a unashamed Christian man.
Right.
That says a lot for our country.
Yep.
I mean, he's a very smart individual, and some of them probably just voted for him because he was intellectually a brainchild. But I mean, they did not vote for him because he's a Christian. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So, I'm bullish on our country. I think we're taking, maybe there's small baby steps, but we're baby stepping in the right direction in our
Right.
state, in our country. But I think holding elected officials at the local level and being involved in those races to not say, oh, that's a good guy, he's a pretty smart business guy in Bossier Parish. Like, and I remember having a conversation with our superintendent saying something. I mean, like we can't ask you when you're applying if you're a Christian, right? Hey, are you Christian?
Right.
Because I want Christian leaders in my schools. But what's wrong with asking them, like, okay, when you have a big decision to make, how do you do that?
Right.
And look, in our Bible Belt, even if you're not a Christian, the correct answer then is to say, oh, I get my knees and I pray about it.
Yeah, that's right.
But that's not in every place we go to. But I think you have discernment then to say, okay, if they said, hey, well, I'm just trying to find something to make more money, or, we decided it's for time for me to go to work, or name all the answers. If they didn't say, like, I'm going to hit because my family is a family, we hit our knees and decided this is the direction the Lord was taking us in, because then you're curving some of the things that are happening in the school as a Christian, maybe not pushing Christianity on kids, but just as a lifestyle to look at somebody who does things the right way and has morals and character and
Right.
values, and without ever saying, hey, I think you're missing something called Jesus Christ.
Right.
They may come up and they're going to ask them, what's different about you, Coach May?
Right.
What is it? Well, if they ask you, I think, I think all of a sudden you throw the rules of Bossier Parish out the window and say, I'll tell you what I think's different. I'll tell you what's different about me. You know, I trust
Yep.
Jesus Christ every day of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And that's, if you feel like you're missing something in your life, I can guarantee you I know what it is.
Yeah, that's right. And he
And
would.
I can
He
help you
did.
figure it out.
That's right.
You know, so,
Yeah.
and there's places you'll be fired for that on the spot. But I think if the Lord puts you in that position, he may protect you from being fired or have something better in mind for you anyway. So, you know.
Right. Yeah, I want to zoom in on that, folks, because again, particularly as Christians, and you look at all the national craziness, again, there's always the temptation, even in myself all the time, to armchair quarterback it, right? Your state politician who you know is a Christian is not making decisions like you think they should, or even somebody like Mike Johnson, who's the literal speaker of the House. We have to trust God with what God's doing before we trust what anybody else is doing, and trust that He's at work in their life, in their situations that we can't relate to as common people. I have to remind myself of that before I get too caught up in the rhetoric of the media. But also, too, what's so funny about our little county that no one's ever heard of is, again, we're not talking to you as complete strangers. I remember running to many barbecues and church cookouts with Mike Johnson, who
Yes.
nominated me to go to the college that I went to, right? And went to plenty of church functions with Congressman Bamburg here. So we kind of speak from experience about him and his family and about other people to show you that, again, what you see on TV and on Twitter isn't always the case. And praise be to God for that, or else we'd all be in a really bad position, right? But with respect to Christians doing the best they can where they're at, I think you hit it on the head with being just an authentic Christian. I've heard many the kind of example you provided. I've heard many people in the town we grew up in talking just like that, fearlessly, lovingly. And it was profound. So hopefully those are the kinds of, we don't really think about those things as, political actions. Oh, what? Just being a Christian. But it really is. It's small because they're small steps toward a particular kind of society, which is political. And so closing here with all those things in mind, what are some ways that folks can support their local politicians as Christians? What are things they could be praying for?
Man, I think when I hear somebody pray that the Lord directs my steps and my speech and my interactions with my other members, it goes a long way, because that's where you're going to get, even if you're not sharing Christ with them directly, that's where they're going to see Christ in your life, is in your interactions with them. So I think anybody that serves in a body of politics would say, pray for God's direction to be on my life at all times, and don't let me start either trying to make press clippings or reading the clippings about myself and thinking that it's me doing anything that's good, that all the glory should go to God.
Right.
So, you know, so that's, I think that's the biggest thing you can do for your local politics, all the way to the president of the United States, because the Lord hears it. Donald Trump may not hear it, but the Lord hears it. And if we get enough people praying for him, then his steps will be guided as well.
Right. Amen to that. I love it. Congressman, thank you so much for your time. Is there anywhere where people can follow you, social media, what you're up to, or keep up with Louisiana politics?
Man, I'm decently active on Facebook at Dennis Bamburg for Louisiana, and so they can keep track of us there. And just, I think Louisiana is going to be on the map here shortly. So we're trying to do a
That's
lot
right.
of great things in Louisiana in a good manner. And so thank you so much for having the gumption to go do something like this, because I know that you got a lot of things going on in your life that could tear you away from taking the time to go do this, and hopefully that this reaches a lot of people for Christ.
Amen. Well, with that, folks, we will close. We pray thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And Lord, help us to mean it. Until next time, may God bless you and your family. Bless this nation, and may Christ have his crown rights. This is the Politica Christiana podcast. The reformer Heinrich Bullinger noted, quote, "There is more true virtue in one political man, who governeth the commonwealth and doth his duty truly, than in many thousands of monks and hermits." What is so evident about men like Congressman Bamburg is their love for God, family, and community. No amount of pressure, mental gymnastics and intellectual jockeying, or mountain of excuses would prevent them from standing up for those three loves in their lives. We need more men like this to bless our land with the love of God and people. As Dr. Stephen Wolfe has identified, quote, "The prince, magistrate, is the first of his people, one whom the people can look upon as a father or protectorate of the country, a world shaker of our time, who brings a Christian people to self-consciousness and who, in his rise, restores their will for their good." Lastly, stand for your state. If we are ever going to tame the beast of the federal government and restore a semblance of harmony and community to the places where we live, Christians will have to care about their state and local politics. Many Christians are doing great work in this regard, with the County Before Country movement as an example. But there are still plenty of things we could all be doing to right our course as a people. We'll close with a quote from the conclusion of Raymond Simmons' powerful work titled The Confessional County. Quote, "We need to remember that freedom is not just so we can do what we want, but so God gets what he deserves. Pure worship and a righteous society that acknowledges him." This is the Politica Christiana podcast, where Christian politics are rightly understood, analyzed, and applied.